Welcome to A Learner's Journey. My name is Molly Sanders, and the goal of this podcast is to inspire and motivate you by connecting you with a variety of passionate horsewomen and men who have dedicated their lives to helping horses and their people. I'm grateful you're here. In this episode, I get a chance to catch up with Lena Haug. Many of you got a chance to meet Lena when I interviewed her a few months ago when she was preparing to head off to Mongolia for the world's longest horse race. In this conversation, I get a chance to talk to her after she's done the race, and this conversation is so packed with fascinating information about the things that she encountered on this great adventure. If you haven't listened to the first interview, I would encourage you to do that, but you could jump into this one and it'll make sense because we're basically just hearing about her experiences during this race. I think you're going to love this interview. I am so excited to talk to you. I have so many questions. But the first thing I wanted to ask you is, after having done this crazy adventure, which we're going to talk a lot about, would you do it again?
If I had never done it, I would drop everything and do it. It would be my top priority. For me, this race ended up being like the most profound spiritual journey. And for me, what that ended up being was like a priceless. I would never risk trying to do this race again and have a similar experience because it was absolutely perfect. I got the opportunity to hit every edge I'd ever thought I could encounter, and then 50 more. and
Wow.
and then what happens when you're stripped of everything, right? I mean, I'm used to the backcountry where you don't have that much equipment, but I was stripped down to this level of relying on an external source of energy. Like I've never been that far past my edge to where I relied on this, this power, this nature to just hold me up and show me who I am. And I got to meet a version of myself that was available, present, joyful, blissful, that I'd never met before. And I would never risk trying to win a race. I mean, I did not cross the finish line first, but to me, in my heart, I won it for all the reasons above.
That's so amazing. It's so beautiful, and it made me think of I'm always interested in watching people that do these grand adventures. I think I told you that in our first interview. And there's a series that I've been watching. I can't even remember the name of it, but it goes into, like, there's a river rafting episode and then a mountain climbing episode, and just people that are I think having similar experiences to what you're talking about, that they're just stripped of everything and they're faced with survival and nature in its extreme. And I think it's such a profound experience, and how cool. And I think it's really interesting that you don't want to do it again, not because it was a terrible experience, but because it was so profound. Yeah.
That's exactly it. I mean, I feel like if I was to do the Mongol Derby a second time, and maybe in a year or two, I'll have a different thought about it.
Sure.
I would ride there tomorrow. I mean, that was amazing, unbelievable. But the racing part, if I was to do it again, I feel like it would be with the purpose to win it by crossing the finish line first, and that it's just not important to me.
So did that, because I know that you have a competitive part of you, or you wouldn't be driven to do the things that you do, right? So did that come up as you were out there? Did you have to grapple with that, or tell us a
Once
little bit
you're
about
out there, and I think most riders would agree, you realize this race is probably about 75-80% luck.
that? Okay.
And each leg is its own race. And if you and I got to ride each leg as its own race. And there were some that I won with flying colors and some that I was dead last. And they just you get the average. The average is the race
Right.
itself. And um I think after my first day I had a really rough start. It was I could chalk it up to just bad luck. Um but I was dead last on the first day, stuck with a heart penalty on my first leg, and barely felt like I was ever going to crawl out of that. So the competitive side, it shifted very quickly. I think by the second day, it was like I I realized how hard it would be to catch up to the people in the front without going over our time allowance.
Hmm.
Uh, Within the time parameters and the horses, and knowing realizing that every horse, every leg is going to be so wildly different that it didn't feel possible unless the people in the front had major penalties to try and catch up to them.
Okay. So what happened on the first day? What was the bad luck that happened?
So on this at start camp, the first leg, the horses are assigned to you to keep the playing field even. And so I was handed this done, and he was very sweet and very mellow. And I remember when I hopped on him, he didn't move. He just kind of stood there, and I was like, "Ooh, this is not looking good." And then one of the other riders, one of the younger guys, he yelled over, "Sucks to suck." My training ride and he's slow. And I was like, oh no. I was like, okay, well, at least he's safe because there's a lot of people that get injuries on the start line because it's a mass start and we
Okay.
count. And the second, so he was very conservative, but the bigger problem was is he colicked.
Oh
So I
no.
I was riding with Deirdre and Alex, another gal, and we had decided to go a little bit as the crow flies, which was up and over these rolling hills. Not our greatest plan, and we, lesson learned, avoid hills. But I babied this horse. He barely picked up a sweat. But at some point, he um, started to act a little funny. And by the time I got to the station, we did that leg in 3.5 hours, which is very long.
Hmm.
Um, he came in at a high heart rate, and the heart rate never dropped. And at about 30 minutes, his heart rate actually increased, and he started doing the rolling, kicking stomach.
Oh.
Classic signs. Super bummed. The vets were incredibly gracious. They were like, Lena, you came in. We thought the horse was looked perfectly fine. They kept saying, "Oh, he's fine. He'll drop," because he wasn't sweating. He didn't look fatigued. He looked just sleepy. And yeah, he colicked. We tried to give him fluids, but the herder I think was a little bit embarrassed, and so he kind of grabbed the horse and pulled the bridle off and let him free. So there was nothing to be done. But I immediately sat a 2-hour penalty on the first leg, first day. But it got
Oh.
so as I was waiting my 2-hour penalty, everyone else has gone through the station is left now for horse station two. When I was done sitting my penalty, I went out to go pick my next horse, and there was one horse on the line, and he was freaking out because all of his buddies had left. When I say turn the horses loose, I mean there's no fences. They run loose as wild herds. So
Hmm.
all of the herd had gone or was chosen and ridden off on. So one of the vets, Kazi, and I tried to saddle him, and he broke free of the rein. He tore my rein and took off. So
Oh.
I had so
So you had no horse.
of course.
Oh my
So
gosh.
okay, what now? Should I walk? I don't want another penalty. And it was agreed upon by headquarters that they would actually give me a leg forward in the van. It was about 5 o'clock at this point. I had done one leg. We try and do 3 legs a day at a minimum. And so I got a ride forward free of penalty to horse station two and got to start fresh the next day. But as the very first day and the first legs with nothing to compare it to, it was incredibly stressful. I cried just because, first of all, one of my biggest goals was horse welfare. I was horrified that on my first leg I got a penalty because my horse was unwell. And, now I'm dead last. Like you're training so hard for this, and suddenly, it's just chalked up to luck. Like,
Right.
so it shook me up a bit because I was like, this is this isn't flowing well. This is not great. But I got a good night's rest and got to start fresh on day two. And then from then on out, it was just cruisy.
And as far as the race regulations go, because it seems a little unfair that you got the penalty for a horse colicking, like, and it wasn't like you came in at a really fast pace. You were, you were going slow, you were doing all the right things. Did they consider not giving you the penalty, or did they have to just go, you know what, we've got to follow this and not make an exception?
Yeah. Heart rate is hard. Heart rate, they pretty much hard line. The the horses, the goal of this is, so a resting heart rate for horses like 25 to 40, and they want our horses to come in at 56 beats within 30 minutes. And what that encourages is a long walkout.
Okay.
So after that, I made a rule for myself of 2.5 to 3 kilometers out, I will walk, and that every time your horse will pass right through. And we're constantly, you know, horse welfare is the top priority of the race.
Mhm.
We coming into this country where horses are absolutely sacred, and the herders know their horses so well. They're
Mhm.
they're they're honored, and we're coming in as strangers, and that would be very unbefitting of us to come and run their horses into a broken state. So I think, and I really respect the heart rate, the welfare penalty, and the vets check their mouth, they check saddle sores, they check their backs, they check the whole horse over to make sure that we've ridden them clean,
Mhm.
and that makes for a good choice for the race.
Yeah, for sure. So do you remember, so that night of the first day, I'm sure that was like, you're like, this is not what I signed up for. I mean, you touched on it already. You've done all this preparation. Here you are, dead last. You only got to ride one leg. I mean, like, kind of, if you could have written out the worst scenario, it might have been, some of those things. Like, do you remember, what did you do to come back for day two? Or was day two a hard start?
Day two was great. So that night, I had a little check in with myself, and I just, had to let go of it. Essentially, go, that was today, and tomorrow is an entirely new day, and I learned these few things that I will change moving forward. And if I have a situation come up, I'm gonna try and deal with it in the moment. And that ended up being a really good mindset, because there was a lot of moments that came up that needed to be evaluated in that
Right.
moment. But no, I didn't hang on to it. I did not hang on to what that felt like, because starting at horse station 2 the next morning, I was with the majority of the riders at that point. So
Okay.
most of the riders were at horse station 2 on the first night, and so I basically got to start back into the pack.
Okay, that's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Um, so I know that you, throughout this, experience, you probably have a very long list of things that you learned. Are there a couple that really stand out for you?
Ooh, yeah. Um, wow. There are a lot. I think the biggest one coming back and processing the whole experience was just um a like following my gut and my heart was a big one. It was put to the test. And I can attribute, I think, a lot of my overall well-being after the race, and physical well-being after the race, to being very, very keen on what my heart, my gut was telling me, as far as picking horses, routes, people to stay with, people to interact with and ride with, and slowing down. Whew, that's a big one for me. I tend to be a person that is thinking in the future, and this race was 10 days of absolute presence. I mean, I did not have the opportunity to think in the past or the future. It was here right now.
Right.
And I know, I mean, meditation is that practice, right? And
Hmm.
to actively be forced into it for 10 days straight is the greatest gift. And that was definitely a concern of mine coming back of, am I, can I embody what that gave me? Can I tap back into that? Can I, make small shifts in my life to not get stuck in the future? Um, so I think that was the greatest lesson that I received and hope to carry on.
Yeah, that's really cool. I just thought of something, and in my right now in my brain it relates, but once it comes out of my mouth it may not. But you know how if you ride a horse that's really well trained and you can get a feel for what that feels like how it's such a great experience, and then you can bring that to other horses. It kind
Mhm.
of reminded me of that this experience, this 10-day experience, gave you that experience of what it feels to be truly present.
Yeah,
And now you're back in your regular life, and it all the challenges that come with it, but you have that experience of what that feels like to be truly present.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, and we have the skills to like tap into it. Um, I have this thing that I do now. I'll close my eyes and I'll picture where I was at one point in the race, and I'll let this flooding of green flow into my mind, and immediately my heart rate comes down, and I can tap into it, and it's a thing I can draw on. So I can build this picture in my mind if I close my eyes of being on the step at a particular point in the race. My mind floods with this like dark sagey green, and I can slow my heart rate and bring myself back to this more present moment. And it's something I need to practice. I actually did it right before our interview here,
Oh,
and
cool.
for me it wells up that opportunity of being here now, not getting stuck in what I should be doing, what I could be doing, where I need to be in 2 hours, or
Right.
so yeah, it's, and like you use the example of hopping on a horse that's very skilled, one that's been trained very well, and then bringing that gift to your other horses.
Mhm.
And that's a great example. I think what we can get stuck in is thinking we know it. And like I don't want to get in the place where I think I've got this, I've got it, this is how would, I learned this thing and now I've got it. It's
Yes.
an growing seed, and I want to be continue being curious and continue growing from that. That's just the beginning, really.
Yeah, it's interesting as I've been doing these interviews, one of the common elements that I've been hearing over and over from all these, amazing horse people, is that the red flag warning of, I got this. As soon as you start going, yeah, I got this, look at me, I got this figured out, that it's like, abort, run. It's like
Oh man,
not a good sign. So,
absolutely. And the
yeah.
Derby, I think, is just like this metaphor for all things life. That's exactly it. I mean, you think for 1 second you've got this figured out, and your horse face plants in a marmot hole, and down you go. I
Yes.
don't know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, super, super interesting. So what's something that surprised you?
Whew. I was okay. Many things, pretty much every moment was surprising, but I think a big one was how difficult it was to do more than 3 legs in the time we were allotted. Like on one leg, you might get a crazy fast horse, and you're like, I'm gonna do 4 or 5 legs today, and then the next horse you hop on is like trotting for 40 kilometers, and then you're back kind of averaging out. So I definitely thought that I could catch up or move around a bit more in the time allotment, and that was much harder than anticipated. The other thing that surprised me is I expected to camp out a lot more. I only camped out one night with a family that was not associated with the race at all, and that was because of how unpredictable the horses really were. As far as, so there was the time constraint, so we rode from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. at first, and then they did shift that in the middle of the race because people weren't going to finish. But in that time frame, you generally get into the next horse station, the third horse station of the day, at around 5:45. And so if the cutoff was at 6, why was it worth riding 5 minutes out and then camping if You have to hobble your horse. Your horse is going to run away. They are very challenging to bridle. They do not want to be touched. And then you have to saddle it by yourself and get on and try and not get bucked off. So with those obstacles, it ended up not making sense for me to camp out really hardly ever.
So
Except
if you got into the last station and you decided to camp out, what I'm hearing you say is that you would you take a fresh horse, or would it be the horse that you came in? Okay. So it's the
yeah,
horse you came in on and you ride out, and then the next day when it starts, do you need to ride that horse back and pick a new horse, or you leave on that horse?
leave on that horse. So you're only ever riding, let's say 9 to 10, horse station 9 to 10, for example. If you got halfway between the two and camped out, you're responsible for grazing your horse for an hour in the morning and at night. They need to be near water. You need to hobble it in order to try and contain it. Um, you cannot walk up and halter or bridle these horses. Like the way they're caught is on a huge stick with a little lasso on the end being galloped like from a horse and rider chasing it. Like they are not handleable. Um, and I've worked with a lot of Mustangs. Like these horses aren't wild like Mustangs; they're wild like feral dogs. They're wild. So if at night when you're trying to sleep, if you're camping out and you have your horse hobbled, they do a three-legged hobble.
Mhm.
Most of the time, your horse will hobble away, and you will be searching for it for a couple hours. If you're with someone else, you can tie the bridles together so their faces are together, and that will slow them down a lot. And you'll probably have them pretty close to you. But then you need to saddle them, which again, sometimes there was two herders, one kind of in a chokehold, the other one getting it saddled. It just depended on the horse, but most of the time they're not handleable. So camping out involved a lot more, risk as far as like you may have just given yourself 30 extra minutes of riding than other people, but maybe you're spending 4 hours the next morning trying to find your horse. So to me, it makes sense. The way that my timing ended up every afternoon, at 6 o'clock, I was close enough to a horse station that it made sense for me to stay there.
Right. Okay. So, and what was it like at the station? Was it tense or?
No, it was so nice. You have these are nomadic families. They've been contacted before the race by some of the race organizers. They're met with. They have ger is the Mongolian word for yurt, which I learned yurt is actually the Russian word. So
Oh,
I'm gonna
okay.
so they had an extra ger set up for us to sleep in. It's just kind of plastic laminate flooring and then the circular walls, and sometimes there'd be like little stools or something, but usually it was just empty. And that's where we would sleep in. They would feed us. And then that's where the horse station, like where the lines are with the horses. So the next morning we'd wake up at 5, pack up bedrolls, get water, eat a bite, get a bite to eat, stretch a little bit, and then be ready to ride at 6:50.
Well, it sounds like, because I remember in our first interview, you talked about how excited you were to get to know the people and the culture and the food and all those things. So it sounds like that was ready made at the station.
Yeah,
It was all there.
it was all there. And these families Mongolians are incredibly generous. It is a quote unquote tent culture. So we learned all sorts of etiquette as far as entering a ger and greeting people and like receiving gifts and giving gifts. And Mongolians live in a state of constant sharing stories, sharing their space. You don't knock on a door on a ger. You step in with your right foot immediately. You don't. When you stand in there, you say hello, and often you're offered milk tea, which is like cow's milk with salt and water.
Hmm.
Erag, which is fermented mare's milk. You're immediately offered, food, beverage, hospitality, and they're so curious about what in the hell we're doing out here. Who are these people with their tack and they're riding our horses, and like they love their horses, and the fact that we love their horses was like so wonderful to them. They were so happy to share their passion with us as well.
That's so.
So as at night when you get in and you get your horse through the vet check and you get yourself a bite to eat and sit down, you're pretty exhausted. And I often just would chat for a little bit and then try and sleep as soon as possible. But yeah, we as far as like you dive straight into the culture. There's no this is not like, Americans have horses and they have a little house and hotel, or I mean you the nomadic families are your lifeline. They are making this possible.
That's really cool. So one thought that I had, or one question I have is, so I know that the mare's milk is a big part of the culture. Um, are they riding these horses?
They don't ride mares, no. So
Okay.
mares are really for breeding and mare's milk. Um, they are pigeted on like a little line, so it'd be like two pieces of wood in the ground with a line on it, and that's where they'll bring the mares in the morning to milk, and they tie the mares in foals on it for maybe half the day,
Mhm.
which is a really interesting thing because as feral as the horses are, they tie very well. So
Hmm.
you could always rely if you needed to, you could tie the horse to like the side of a fence. There weren't many fences,
Mhm.
or there are no trees, so there's no trees to tie anything to, or the high lines, which is where most people keep their horses. So yeah, the mares are pretty much strictly for food and breeding.
And
And
but the horses that you guys were using for the race, do they ride those horses?
yeah,
Okay.
not necessarily a lot. There, so Nadam is a huge festival that happens throughout the country, and horse racing is one of three sports, but really it is the main sport of the country. So Nadam horses are their race horses. So we were riding stallions and geldings only. You knew if it was a stallion because it had their full mane, and the geldings all have their mane and forelock roached.
Okay.
Um, if it was a particularly fast and successful racehorse, they often would tie the forelock up into like a little pom pom, or they would have a blue band around the neck. That meant one of two things. One, it was like this horse is a retired Nadam racehorse and had been very, very successful. Or if you saw one out, in a herd somewhere, it could mean that they're retired and that they were to be honored.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
yeah, so much respect for the horse. So Nadam horses are ridden to be fit. They're not ridden to be managed. Then if you were tired and you needed a horse that was a little more predictable, often a little slower but more predictable, you could tell the herder humble. I need a humble, muddy humble
Mhm.
horse. And you could also tell if they'd been ridden a lot because the girths they use are very thin, and you could see scar like white hairs. And the horses had pretty worn feet and had the we call them herder scars. You'd say, okay, that horse has been ridden a lot to move like goats and sheep, and is probably going to be a lot more manageable
Mhm.
um, to ride. So, but then no rhyme or reason, I'd pick a horse and think it looked faster than hell, and it would just plod along.
Uh-huh.
Or one of my very, very fastest legs, the horse looked fat and unkempt, and he was insane, like terrifying. Um, yeah, but all of the herders are they're paid a little bit more. So for us to use their horses, they are being paid. That's a huge part of the race fee. If we as riders, when we get to the next horse station, the vets make a note on our comments. We will comment on each horse, and if we say that horse was amazing, that herder is going to get paid more.
Oh, wow.
They're given like a training program to get the horses in shape for this race. And if a rider comes and goes, wow, that horse plodded along, was so tired, that herder's not going to get paid as much, just because we want the motivated, they should be motivated to get the horses in shape for this race.
Mhm. Okay. And that was another thing is after your race was done, I noticed that I think it was like a couple weeks later, another one started.
Yeah.
How many races a year are there?
So normally there's just one a year.
Okay.
It was just that with COVID, the race had been postponed for 2 years.
Okay.
Our race was supposed to be, well, technically ours was the 2020 race, and then there was the 2021 race. So they ended up doing them back to back, which is something that they'll probably never do again because I know it
Right.
was very simple. Um, but it just did because there was such a backlog of
Okay, that makes sense. And now it's time for a short commercial break. I'd like to invite you to a special private Facebook group called A Learner's Journey. It started in January of 2022 because I would hear from so many people about these podcast interviews, and I'd hear wonderful stories and reflections, and I started to think about, wouldn't it be cool if other people could hear about these? And so I started the group, and now it's turned into something bigger, and it's a wonderful, safe place for horse lovers to come together and share about their journeys and support each other along the way. I'd love to have you join in. And now back to the interview with Lena. I've got some questions from a Facebook group that goes along with this podcast. And so I wanted to ask you some of these questions because they're really good. So this one's from Renee, and she's wondering, from all the preparation for this race, what was most helpful, what was least helpful, and what, if anything, would you change?
Great question.
Yeah.
Okay. Most helpful, ride. Just ride. I quit my job in January and went back to colt starting and rode for 6 months. I had no injuries, no sores. My body held up like a champ. I was so happy. So that's the best thing you can do. The other main thing about preparation was mindset. I went in with the goal of having an experience. So I went in with an open mind to what was to be expected. So I had done some, brain opening of, this could go one of a zillion directions. And my goal is to be safe, come back in one piece, prioritize horse welfare and experience this culture and this incredible situation as a whole. And that allowed me to have an experience that wasn't focused on crossing the finish line first.
Right. That's really good. Did you, you don't have to out anybody, but did you see other people there that had more of a competitive mindset? And then,
oh yeah,
maybe they're getting home and they could have had that race anywhere. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I definitely, that may be the experience for some people. I think it is wild enough to where it shook a lot of that out of people.
Right.
But in the beginning, when we all met in UB, in Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital, before we headed out to the steppe, there was definitely a lot of sizing up, a lot of storytelling, strategizing, talk of like what we should do, what we shouldn't. And I think a lot of people's expectations were changed and humbled in a lot of way. And like, I was humble is the word I would use to describe how I felt afterwards.
Yeah.
Very humbled. And I think we can all agree on that. But yeah, and then the thing I think that didn't help, let's see. I think gear is critical. However, there were a lot of people that lost their gear and did the entire race without it. And I think it's an important thing to know that you're not going to like chafe your back or get hurt with, what you choose to ride in. I spent a lot of time thinking about gear, and maybe I didn't need to in the end, based on the fact that some people did this entire race without a single thing except what they were wearing.
Interesting. Just because they lost their stuff?
Yeah, well, if the horse takes off, there's no fences, so you may never see it again.
Okay. Wow. So they provided the saddle and the bridle, but all of your stuff was tied to the saddle. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we had a little saddle bag with your sleeping bag, medication if you need it. Like whatever could fit into 5 kilograms was in that little saddle bag. And if it took off, you may or may not see it again.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's crazy.
From New Zealand that lost theirs on the first leg and did the entire race without any gear.
Wow. Yeah, that is nutty. They're really thinking, oh man, all that time I spent stressing over what to get is
totally gone.
Yeah.
Again, practice and non-attachment. From one moment to it's just like things just happen. Okay, that's how it is now.
Right. Right. So would you change anything?
Whew. I've been asked this question and I have to say no, only because the profound experience as a whole for me, if I changed anything, I would risk not having that.
Right.
So no, I wouldn't change. Yeah. I had an extraordinary time.
That's so wonderful. I love that. I love that concept that, our struggles, our hardships, that there can be a sense of gratitude for them because they brought you to a certain place. And like in those 10 days, it was all condensed, right? But all of those things factored into what you're saying, your experience. So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question. This one's from Rita, and she's wondering how many legs each horse will run in a day, and how many races, which I think you may have answered, but how many
So
legs and how many races?
I think that's a great question to bring because horse welfare is always such a big thing, especially in horse racing. These horses are doing one leg only in the entire,
In the
right? So
entire race.
entire race. So
Oh,
we had 29 legs. They're all about 40 kilometers, so like I don't know, 30 miles. Each each station is run by one or two or three families. So their horse is used for the one leg and then returned back home. They are
okay.
more than once. And they're only ridden by one rider.
Wow.
If you can think of the mass of this, they had vets come out and pre-vet check over 1,200 horses for this.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
That is unbelievable. How many vets were there?
We had, I believe, 8 vets.
Wow, that is crazy. How do you know how long they were there before you guys arrived? Like how long did they have to do all this?
Um, they start prepping. I mean, that's why they do one race a year. I mean, it's prep constantly. And remember, these are nomadic families. They move every 30 to 40 days. So finding them, negotiating where they're going to be in 6 months, making sure that, they take pictures, they document the horses, they give them a training program. And then, right before the race, I can't honestly say exactly. I don't know exactly what the process is right before,
Mhm.
but the horses are turned loose, eat and drink all night. So they have to be herded back up, tied up. And there's 60 plus horses on the line because we have to have extras in case, you know, in the morning, ready to go at 6:30 a.m.
Wow. That is, yeah, that's a huge undertaking. And it's super
You know,
interesting that they only run one leg, but it makes sense what you're saying that it's, just a collection of families.
right.
But I was thinking that, you probably see one of the horses that you'd ridden again, or maybe ride it again. But wow, that's an incredible amount of organization.
Yeah. And then those horses are ridden back or herded back home, all 40 kilometers back because they
Wow.
have a truck and trailer and there's not roads necessarily.
Right.
Just
Right.
it's all old school.
Wow, that's amazing. Um,
Mhm.
and then like you already mentioned, typically there's only one race a year, but this year because of the backlog of COVID,
Yep.
there were two then this year or three?
Two races, just two
Two.
races.
Okay.
And
Okay.
the second race did our race in reverse.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So a lot of the same families, some swapped out. There was some issues, or some families just said no thanks. I'd rather not do it again. Um, but they likely used the same horses from our race. So this
Okay.
year, unique year, those horses did two races, but
Okay.
each horse still only did one leg in the 10 days.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so there's another one. Let's see. Stephanie, she's wondering what you learned about how the native people treat their horses, which you talked a little bit about, and the equipment they use. So is there anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah. Um, Again, I'll just reiterate, these horses are sacred to Mongolians. They are horrified that we have fences and keep our horses corralled. Like, the horses live as wild bands. They are completely intact. I had this moment trotting, last little bit into the station, and I saw two stallions just grooming each other. I was like, oh, the beauty
Yeah.
of nature in its natural form, so the herders are a little like gruffer, like when they pull the bridle on and off. There's definitely some ear twitching happening. There's some choke holds. The horses are arguing. They're not down. they ride standing up, and they have they're basically wooden saddles that are very small, narrow. You don't sit in them, you stand. Um, and they are the most incredible riders. I mean, I'd see these guys hauling up and down hills, not holding on to the reins, just with a pole, lassoing a horse. I mean, nobody I know could ever ride like that. They are velvet, and us falling off our horses, they probably just laugh at us, like, "What's wrong with you? Just stay on. Don't you ride horses?" Most amazing horsemen and women. Yeah, but as far as like handling and tending to them, they're deeply concerned if the horse is injured or hurt. They want to make sure everything's okay. They're not going to stroke and pet and love and cuddle their horses. It's just not part of how they handle them. And that's partly to keep the horses safe. You know, the horses spend 9 months out of the year as wild herds and need to rely on their natural ability to survive out there as horses. So if they become too domesticated, that could risk their lives. I could talk. I can keep talking about, like, as far as the way that they handle the horses and like their training. They don't handle the horses at all from the right side. It's all from the left, and they don't touch anywhere past the saddle. Like they don't groom the tail. They groom the race horses to keep them, looking nice. They don't brush the mane and tail though. They don't like detangler or anything. But a big thing with grooming is on the race horses, they'll collect the sweat because they consider the sweat of the horse honorable and sacred. So they'll actually collect the sweat off of the horses that win these races.
And what do they do with it?
I'm a little unsure. As far as I could see, they like rub it on themselves.
Okay.
They use these wooden sweat scrapers. I brought a few home. But yeah, it's that is a sacred thing, is the winning of the horse.
That's really cool. So is there anything that you learned with your time there about the treatment of the horses that you'll now bring back, and has it changed you with your horsemanship at all?
I don't think it's changed my horsemanship. I think it's changed I think I could put my finger on the importance of horses getting to be horses, more than necessarily the training goes. We really do pull horses out of their natural element, and that's so abundantly clear when you see this landscape where there's nowhere for the horses to get trapped. They're just They are in their own element, and riding a horse that feels wild but is so handy on the ground. I mean, the way they hovercraft over completely uneven terrain, bogs, holes. If you get out of their way, I mean, they're masters at navigating this landscape, and don't necessarily spook at things that our horses would spook at. They run straight and fast, where I was like, I would never think that my horse would run this far so straight. They'd be zigzagging, and these horses are just like, pow,
Interesting.
rockets. So yeah, as far as training goes, I did not feel that I would necessarily change my techniques or mindset in training, but maybe a new respect of what horses are capable of.
That's really cool. And then I gotta ask you about, so I don't know if you posted or if the Mongol Derby site, if they posted about what happened where you got kicked.
Yeah.
When you came off. So can you tell us a little bit about what happened with that?
Yeah. This was on day 2, so very early on.
Gosh.
My last leg of the day, and this was a horse that I think I mentioned he was like the fastest horse I'd ever ridden, but a herder handed him to me and was like, this is the one, Hortamor, which means his fast horse. I'm like, okay, he looks pretty fat. His feet are all splayed out. Okay, well, whatever. It's the last leg. And when I hopped on him, he was actually not too squirrely. He jumped around a little bit, but not too bad. And I trotted him out. And I waited for 2 friends, which I learned is not a good idea. Don't wait, just go. And by the time they got on and I was like, all right, let's go, I pointed in the right direction, he split in 2. He just started bronking. And I was not ready for it because when I got on and I was like ready for it, he was just fine. So he just went to put his head between his legs and just stuck it to the sun. And he wasn't going to stop. So I bailed and I rolled off his right hip. And as I came off, he clocked me in the face on the left side. And when I stood up, I felt blood running down my face, but I didn't like nothing hurt. So I walked back to the horse station to go get him. And one of the medics flagged me down. She was like, "Come here, you're bleeding. What happened?" I was like, "Oh, I think I just got hit in the face." But I had heard it, when he hit me, it rang, like it clocked. And so she was like, "It's probably just adrenaline. Let's just palpate you and see what's going on here." And she palpated my cheek and checked my teeth, and everything was fine. She's like, "Man, you got lucky. You got really lucky." And I have a little scar. It's like a small little laceration on my lip that she taped together. Hopped back on and took off, and that horse was crazy fast. I passed everyone that was on that leg, and had no control, freaking up and down hills. I thought we were gonna die. That was probably one of the scarier rides of my life.
Oh my
Also
gosh.
considering that I wasn't sure if I was okay. If you've ever had like an injury, during an activity, sometimes adrenaline can hide a lot of things. So I was like, am I okay? I don't know. I got kicked in the face. But yeah, he covered 20 kilometers in like 50 minutes, just like, just
Wow.
blew through it.
Wow.
I had people like yelling at me which direction to go because I couldn't pull my GPS out.
Oh my God.
But yeah, so kicked in the face, and there's no mirrors out there, so I didn't know what it looked like, but apparently it turned into a very brilliant rainbow color. The next morning I woke up to see my cheek, it was swollen. I could see it out of the corner of my eye, but it never hurt. I
That's
got
good.
scared.
Yeah, very lucky. And it's interesting, like you said, that they do everything from the left side and you came off on the right.
Yeah,
So it's kind of probably startled him,
totally.
kicked out at you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I watched the documentary, one of the ones that you recommended. And the whole time I was watching it, I was like, I gotta call Lena and tell her not to go. Because it's so intense. And people are coming off and all this stuff. But I realized, how when you realize the importance of the safety of mounting and dismounting, like, I it wasn't until I did a couple of colt starts that I realized that, I mean, it's one of the most predatory looking things that we could do, right? And we change position, that changes the feeling on the horse, and it can really set them off.
Yep.
And when I was watching that documentary of these people getting on these horses, it just showed that to me, like how those probably were the most dangerous moments of the race for you guys, is
Lit.
getting on and getting off.
Yep. The
Okay.
first five, I mean, yeah, you're totally spot on. As you're swinging your leg over, you want to get on and hunker down as fast as possible.
Right.
You could ride the whole leg unscathed on a seemingly great horse, and at the end, when you go to step off, as your leg swings over, they can see it out of the corner eye and freak out and bolt out to the side, and you can fall or get dragged or
Yeah.
any sorts of combinations of ailments. But yeah, so the goal was get on and hang on straight away. The first 5 minutes is the most dangerous generally. And also, rule number one, never, ever, ever get off your horse in the middle of a leg for under any circumstances. Because if you have to try and get on by yourself or as you're getting off, you have reins and then you have a get down line, and the get down line is leather and they break. So if the horse freaks out and bolts and you're dragging, it will snap, and then there goes your gear. And like we said, you don't know if you're ever going to get your gear back.
Right. So how many riders were there in your race?
We had 47.
And how many finished?
I don't know the exact number. I want to say 30.
Okay. Okay. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty darn good
It is.
considering. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really, and it was also really, it was part of the craziness is getting into a horse station. Mind you, we're in our own little world. I don't have a phone. I have my GPS and my tracker, and the tracker is strictly for a life and death situation to set an alarm if something's going wrong. I have no communication with anyone else other than what's happening right here, right now. But when you go through the stations, you hear little bits and pieces of what's happening around the race. And you hear, oh, so and so broke their shoulder. So and so is like in UB because they had, their lungs are messed up. They broke ribs. So and so broke. And you're like, oh my God, there's just carnage left and right. And you're like, okay, whew, stay safe, blinders on, just stay together, be safe, right? Be safe, ride smart. I mean, the carnage is real, and you know that these are all incredible riders, and
Right.
happened.
So did that, like I hear you saying that, you really had to stay in the moment and kind of tune that stuff out. What was there ever a time that you wanted to call it quits?
No,
No?
again, that I feel like I got to ride such an unscathed race. I mean, in all reality, I had a wonderful time. I had a really good time, and like I said, my body held up really well. My I didn't have any major injuries. Injuries are like a cascading event out there. You're riding so far and so long that if you have like a rub on your stirrup, or if your stirrups are twisted a little bit and your outer knee is getting a strain, that strain is going to turn into a tear in 2 days. Like it, if you fell and hurt your hip, I mean, you're going to ride a little crooked, your horse might spook, you fall again, you could be toast. I mean, they're just small things cascade into enormous injuries very
Right.
quickly. And so I got very lucky, and I did not ever have a moment saying why, like, I should stop. I had one moment where I really contemplated, like, why did I feel like this was necessary? Like, I love adventure and craziness, but like this is really crazy. And then I hit a new edge, and I went, this is crazy for this amazing reason.
Right.
But I did not have the feeling to stop,
Yeah.
thankfully.
Do you remember when, like, was that in the middle of the race or?
The first 3 days may be the most challenging, because you're fresh, you're riding hard the first day, second day. By the third day, your body's like, wow, we're gonna ride 12 hours at a full gallop for most of it, or posting. You're gonna post for 20 kilometers 3 times
Right.
a day. Are you sure? And then your body peaks into this place of like, oh, okay, yes, we are going to do this. Now we're going to cruise. So day 4 is actually kind of a hump day of the race, where your body really questions if this is what you want to do for a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then it accepts it. So it was around day 4 where I had this really great like inner dialogue of reevaluating what winning looks like to me. Um, Checking in with my body, how it's feeling. And around then is when I had those thoughts of like, this is a really long race. Like, what made me feel like this was such a critical part of my life?
Right. Right. That's so cool. It's such a condensed, it's like this whole lifetime lived in 10 days. It's this
Yeah,
super intense condensed thing.
yeah.
So that's
Is
really good.
as all Derby riders would probably agree, it's the come down is a big deal. They call it the Derby blues. People, retelling the stories is such a joy because you get to dive back into that world. But I know a lot of people struggle with re-entering society
Yeah.
and not being around, fellow Derby riders who can look at you and go,
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
the life you just lived.
That's super interesting too. Cause no one, like, I can get a sense of what it was like. I've had experiences not anywhere close to that, but really intense experiences like that. And then, coming back to life can be challenging, because you
Mm-hmm.
want to get back to that experience. So I get what you're saying. Like, I can hear you, I can listen to you, and I can think about my own experiences, but I wasn't there. I don't, I we can't connect over that experience, and that would be challenging. And it kind of makes me think of people that have been in military
Yeah,
experiences, and even more intense than what you went through. And
absolutely.
yeah. So are you in touch with many of the riders that
Oh,
you met there? That's cool.
absolutely. They're
That's
family. Yeah, they're a kin. They will always have a very deep place in my heart, and hope to keep good contact, and we'll put a lot of energy to maintain those relationships
Yeah,
because yeah.
that's great. So, do you have any thoughts on what's next for you?
Ooh, well, I am certainly diving back into my aviation world. I'm gonna channel all of my energy and drive into flying and building up this career in aviation. So um, I'm still my big manifestation dream is to still train horses in the spring and fall and fly in the summer and maybe winter as well, but um, try and blend those two worlds.
That's cool. And do you have a picture in that vision of like what kind of flying? Are you going to do like chartered flying or what would that look
Right
like?
now, the most attractive to me is like bush plane flying, so maintaining, flying the small aircraft. That's subject to change based on what happens.
Sure, sure.
But
That's what I
doors
kind of
open.
see. That's kind of
Yeah.
what I see you doing. Yeah, that's really cool. Um, well, what a delight. Like I went from not knowing anything about this race to getting to meet you and learn a little bit about it and then follow you in the race and now, getting to hear what it was like. So, and I know quite a few people especially in the Facebook group that we have were following you and, I'm sure that people are going to really enjoy hearing this follow-up. So thank you so much. And I hope we stay connected and I get to hear about your adventures to come.
Thank you. And any questions ever, I love reliving the dream.
Thank you for joining us for this interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know one of the things for me that really stood out is Lena's desire to have this be a one off, meaning that she doesn't want to try to repeat it and she doesn't want to change anything because if she changes one thing, it won't be the profound experience that it was. And I love that concept and I think it can really apply to all of our lives that even the tough stuff that happens leads us to some places that we wouldn't end up if we hadn't gone through the tough stuff. And then it reminded me of earlier, I think it was yesterday, I was drinking tea, and every once in a while I'll take a look at the tea bag, the little message that comes on the bag. And the message that I read really resonated with me. And so I thought I'd share it with you. I think it fits this conversation. And hopefully, it's something that you might need to hear. So it says, the world needs your unique gifts. Don't leave with them still inside you. So keep being you. Thanks for being a part of this. And please share it. One of my goals of this podcast is that it reaches the people that need to hear it most. So I'd love for you to spread the word about it. So thanks for being a part of this. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.